There are men who are shaped by history, and then there are men upon whom history is pressed, like a brand upon skin, before they are old enough to understand what is being done to them. Benjamin Netanyahu was born on the 21st of October 1949 in Tel Aviv, a city barely 1 year older than the state it found itself in. Israel itself was an infant nation, raw, surrounded by enemies, intoxicated by its own improbable existence. And into this atmosphere of perpetual siege, of collective memory drenched in catastrophe, Benjamin entered the world as the second son of a man who saw the whole of Jewish history not as a series of chapters, but as a single unbroken tragedy, one that was never truly over. His father, Benzion Netanyahu, was not an ordinary man by any measure. He was a historian of ferocious intellect and darker temperament, a scholar whose life's work was dedicated to documenting the persecution of Jews throughout the centuries, most particularly during the Spanish Inquisition. Benzion was a disciple of Ze'ev Jabotinsky, the founder of revisionist Zionism, a movement that rejected romantic idealism in favor of an iron-walled pragmatism. Jabotinsky believed that the Jewish people would never be safe through diplomacy or concession. He believed only in strength, only in walls. And Benzion Netanyahu absorbed that philosophy not merely as a political position but as a spiritual condition. It became the lens through which he saw everything. To grow up under Benzion's roof was to grow up inside a history lesson that never ended, and that never offered comfort. The dinner table was not a place of warmth or idle conversation. It was a seminar. Benzion spoke of pogroms and expulsions, of the Inquisition's fires, of the Holocaust's machinery, not with the measured distance of a professor, but with the urgency of a man who believed these things were never truly past. They were patterns. They were permanent, and they would repeat. Benjamin, along with his older brother Yoni, and younger brother Ido, was raised on a diet of historical catastrophe and the conviction that survival was not a right but a constant, exhausting achievement. Benzion did not raise his sons to be happy. He raised them to be hard. He raised them to be undeceived about the nature of the world. Sentimentality, in his view, was a luxury that Jewish history had not permitted. The family lived for a time in Jerusalem, but in 1956, Benzion accepted an academic position at Dropsy College in Philadelphia, and the Netanyahu family relocated to the United States, an experience that would prove profoundly formative for the young Benjamin. He spent several of his adolescent years in the Philadelphia suburbs, attending high school in Cheltenham, Pennsylvania, where he excelled academically and socially, already displaying the ease with language and the instinctive charisma that would define him decades later. He spoke English without accent. He understood Americans, their rhythms, their optimism, their appetite for clarity and narrative. He watched them. He learned them. But the shadow of his father followed him across the Atlantic. Benzion was a demanding presence, emotionally remote in the way that certain scholars are remote, not from coldness alone, but from absorption. He was absorbed by history, by argument, by the grand existential question of Jewish survival. Benjamin and his brothers were secondary to this preoccupation, or rather they were enrolled in it, conscripted into Benzion's project without ever being asked. They would be its instruments. They would prove in their own lives what Benzion had argued in his scholarship, that the Jews could only endure through strength, vigilance, and the refusal to capitulate to any illusion of safety. It is impossible to understand Benjamin Netanyahu without understanding what it meant to be Benzion Netanyahu's son. Not a son in the ordinary sense, not a child who is loved and allowed to be imperfect, but a son in the dynastic sense, a bearer of legacy, a continuation of argument. Benjamin grew up knowing that his father's approval was not a warm thing, not easily given, not guaranteed by affection. It had to be earned, and the currency in which it was earned was not kindness or creativity or even happiness. It was accomplishment, achievement in service of the great unending cause. This was the psychological architecture upon which Benjamin Netanyahu was built. And like all architecture, it was both shelter and prison. When Benjamin Netanyahu returned to Israel in 1967 at the age of 18, he was returning to a nation that had just performed one of the most stunning military feats in modern history. The Six-Day War had transformed Israel overnight from a besieged sliver of land into a regional power that had tripled its territory in less than a week. The mood was electric. The sense of possibility was intoxicating. And for a young man raised on his father's doctor,